Friday afternoon. Darren Heitner from Heitner Law also teaches NIL at Miami and joins us on 365 Sports. I've been following Darren for quite some time, even before some of this started to pop with the NIL at Miami Law, and also what he does with sports entertainment and intellectual property. Darren, thanks for your time with Paul and Craig. I'm David Smoak. So are you surprised at how rapidly things are changing after so many decades of just like sitting on the hands when it comes to the NCAA and letting athletes get their value?
First of all, thanks so much for having me. And no, I'm not at all surprised. It's almost like a volcano that is gaining so much gas and steam, and then it just explodes all at once, and there's collateral damage surrounding that. I think that's exactly what we're seeing right now. July 1, 2021, the writing was on the wall for a very long time for the NCAA to know that states, one by one, were passing legislation, having it signed into law to say, heck with the NCAA's prohibitions. We're going to allow athletes in our states to take advantage of their NIL. And lo and behold, it wasn't until hours before July 1, 2021, if we think back 3 years ago now, that the NCAA finally caved in and said, all right, we'll allow it around the nation. And since then, it's been update after update. I feel like every day I wake up and I don't know exactly what is going to occur. What's going to be the latest update? Which state is going to revise its law and push the envelope a bit more? Which person on Capitol Hill is going to propose new legislation that gets nowhere? I mean, almost every day, the story sort of writes itself.
Darren, what do you think this means? So if they do go to this structure or something similar like it, what do you think it means for NIL collectives and how they will continue to operate? Because it doesn't seem to me like they would be mutually exclusive or the schools could just take it over without a collective deciding to exist if it wanted to.
Well, I assume you're referring to if there is a structure implemented where there's revenue sharing. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so if that occurs and we don't really have an appreciation as to what it will look like, we only are hearing leaks associated with settlement communications in a case called House v. NCAA. And those leaks include that there will be a cap on the amount of revenue that can and will be shared by schools. From my perspective, collectives will still exist. I don't see any reason why they wouldn't. And to supplement whatever the revenue may be that is shared on a school-by-school basis. And just because there may be a cap at some number doesn't mean that every single school, even those in the Power 4 or 5 conferences, are going to reach that cap. And so I think collectives will still serve a very important role in trying to create competition school to school, primarily between those schools in the same conference.
So just to be clear, Darren, and I want to ask you more about just this in general, because everybody's acting like here's our solution, and it doesn't appear, it appears too good to be true for one. But so if there was a cap of $20 million, if Georgia wants to pay up to $20 million, they can do that. If TCU wants to pay only 16, they can do that. But can Georgia only spend 20, or can they spend 20 and then NIL Collective can do another $5-10 million on the side of that? Could you kind of clear that up for me?
Sure. Technically, the collectives have and the schools have very much taken the position thus far that they are not one and the same, that collectives are third parties that absolutely are intended to benefit specific schools, but that even though coaches beforehand, behind closed doors, now much more overtly, are involved in the process of determining which players the collective should be reaching out to and the amounts of money that should be offered, technically, they're taking a position we're not the same. Now, there is pending litigation, including a case against Oregon that tries to tie the two together for Title IX purposes. But at least thus far, there hasn't been a ruling in that case or otherwise that says this is all, this is false and the collective is actually part and parcel of the school. So to your question, in that situation where one school may be offering $20 million in revenue sharing and another one in $12 million, nothing would preclude a collective at the school that is at the cap of the revenue sharing from adding additional dollars and spending it.
So when it comes to what Ross Dellinger and many others wrote, it all seems great on the surface of college football fans who would just like some peace and for everything to kind of be settled, but it almost does seem too good to be true because there seems to be a lot of different things that aren't quite fully answered. When you read this proposal, what immediately jumped out to you as far as what's realistic and what is a big question mark as far as getting this across a finish line anytime soon?
Well, I didn't take the position that it's necessarily great or too good to be true. And I heard you use the word solution before. Well, the solution to what problem? I think that's an important question.
House.
Well, right. So the problem right now for the NCAA, for the conferences, and for the schools is that they just keep getting sued and they keep losing. But I don't take the position that a settlement in that case is going to end that in any way, particularly if there is a cap on the revenue sharing. It's those caps that have largely become the subject of litigation against the NCAA that it has lost. I mean, think back to Alston. So the first thing that I wondered when I started hearing about these leaks and the confidential settlement communications is, why would communications that are intended to be confidential start getting leaked? Why is there language in some of these articles, I think one written by Dellinger, that says the plaintiff's lawyers have given an ultimatum saying we got to get this done within 40 days or else? I think really what's happening is that the lawyers are using the media as pawns. And I don't know that there's really a settlement that's about to be brokered, whether that settlement will get approved by a court of law, whether athletes will opt out of the class and bring their own cases. If the solution is ending litigation, I just don't see how we're anywhere near that.
What do you think, Darren? I saw the 40 days. I brought that up on the show. I've seen what Jeffrey Kessler has said about you don't want to get into this jury trial. You don't want to get to the first of the year. In the end, you've been following this. You're very much involved in all of this. What's going to happen? What will it look like? God knows whenever this thing ever is finalized.
I think the biggest concern right now for the NCAA, the schools, the conferences, isn't necessarily shielding themselves from future litigation. If they really, really thought that was priority number one, they would actually recognize the athletes as employees and collectively bargain with them, because you would then shift from allowing athletes to sue on antitrust grounds to it becoming a freely negotiated agreement where labor law controls, and you would preclude litigation. I think the biggest concern with House is you've had a Class B certified, and there's now on the table upwards of $4+ billion in damages. And so that's priority number one to me. I do think a settlement makes sense for both sides. For the NCAA and the schools, absolutely, to mitigate some of the potential ramifications of going to a trial where it could be $4+ billion. Even if you're settling at past damages of 2.9, that's still saving at least $1 billion, which is a lot of money. And then on the plaintiff side, if you're a lawyer, you like money in hand, you like money today, you don't want to have to deal with an appeals process. And if you're taking a contingency on $3 billion, it's not so bad. So it makes sense for both sides to settle. I'm not understanding, and I haven't seen anyone explain it well, how a settlement would preclude future lawsuits. Not unless there's you consider these athletes employees and you start collectively bargaining with them.
Darren, they've done this dance with Congress for a few years now, and it's starting to get kind of tiresome. And there's bills and all that. Would this be a gateway for Congress to try to codify these things, or do they need to maybe get completely out of court before Congress gets involved, which would obviously now at this point be after the election?
Neither.
Okay.
Congress doesn't typically codify settlement agreements. Congress is paying attention to what's going on and is absolutely speaking to the same sources that are providing information to Ross Dellinger and the writers at ESPN. But Congress has been following NIL and litigation surrounding the NCAA for many years. There have been dozens of pieces of legislation drafted, just never getting out of committee or being on the floor for debate. I actually recently was on Capitol Hill at a roundtable hosted by Ted Cruz, and I've followed up very closely with his staff, and there's still continuing efforts by Congress to find consensus between Democrats and Republicans. They just haven't gotten there, and I don't know that they ever will, particularly in an election year. So I wouldn't hold my breath that all of a sudden Congress is going to step in, whether or not this settlement comes to fruition.
Darren, where you mentioned collective bargaining a few times. Is there any kind of a future you see without that for the athletes?
Sure. I actually think athletes right now are probably experiencing somewhat of a golden age. They are able to transfer freely year to year. As in essence, they are unrestricted free agents. They're able to negotiate their quote unquote salaries going into college and then on an annual basis thereafter, even though we're calling them NIL payments and paid by collectives, there's no cap whatsoever. So, gosh, I think we've gone from a position before July 1, 2021, where athletes were absolutely repressed. And I know people will say, well, they got scholarships and they should be satisfied with that. Well, sure. I mean, go for employment and be told, take this or else, and you can't go elsewhere. I never thought that was a good situation for them. But now they're in a great spot. So, be careful what you wish for, I would say. With employment doesn't always come a better situation. Right now, they are in, many of them, not all of them, but many of them are in situations that professional players wish they could be in. So they should be counting their blessings.
Why do you think the schools are so hesitant to enter into employment agreements? What is the big issue there? Is it financially? Like what is the hang up? Because that seems like it would be the agreement that everybody could come to that would, I guess, solve quite a few different things. But why do you think the schools are basically trying to explore every nook and cranny before getting to that point?
Yeah, primarily it has to be a financial issue, whether it's reclassifying schools, conferences, NCAA from a tax perspective, the spend that is going to be required, the benefits, and so on and so forth, that comes with being a W-2 employee. So I think that is absolutely the first concern for the schools, for the NCAA. And then, look, if they do become employees and they're able to collectively bargain, if they're able to unionize and form a bargaining unit, then they can also bargain for other working conditions that changes the system. I don't know that that's as big of a concern for schools. I do think it's economic.
Darren, I know you got to go, and we appreciate your time. Is one of the concerns, like it is anywhere else, the representation that these student athletes are getting through NIL, and they have to be careful about what they're signing and making sure that they understand what they can get or and what they are going to get?
Oh, sure. This is something that I deal with on a daily basis. I represent athletes as their legal counsel, either against unscrupulous agents who try to bind them to terrible agreements and then try to exploit them for money that they don't deserve. I help them with their collective contracts, where oftentimes the document that we receive is extremely one-sided. And you could say it's illusory or unconscionable. And then I go to the collective and they say, well, we've had 75 players just take our agreement and sign it. And I feel terrible for those players. So, yeah, that is part of the seedy section of this industry right now. And I give the NCAA a little bit of credit there, because it does appear to be interested in trying to take some of that out of the equation, whether it be through providing sample clauses, trying to create uniformity in the contract language, and creating a database of agents and other professional service providers where athletes can provide ratings and so on and so forth. So I think there are actually, we shouldn't just attack the NCAA at all times. There are efforts that the association is undertaking that I think are quite noble.
Could you ever see a day where you would want one of your clients to take a job or take an NIL opportunity and also connected to whether they play in bowl games or anything like that?
Yeah, look, I actually have no issue with that. I like situations where parties can negotiate at arm's length for pretty much anything. One of my gripes with the NCAA's NIL rules, outside of the illegal inducement provision that has now been enjoined preliminarily through the case of Tennessee and Virginia, is that the pay for play rule, because I think you should be able to incentivize the players for their performance on the field. Professional athletes can get bonuses if they get over 1,000 yards receiving or get elected to the Pro Bowl, et cetera. Why shouldn't NCAA players be able to benefit in the same way? And similarly, brands who sign athletes who are professional can put in clauses where the athletes don't receive money if they don't play. And, I think that's only fair for the brands when it comes to college athletes too, but they're prohibited from doing that as well. And I never really heard a good justification from that from the NCAA. And I wonder if that's going to be something that's challenged in the near future.
Hey, Darren, thank you, man. Appreciate it. We took more of your time than I said we would, but it was worth it. I hope it was for you as well. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, be well.
Darren Heitner, NIL attorney, his own law firm, the Heitner Law Firm, also teaches